The Seahawks kicked off the second round with a bang, drafting Nick Emmanwori after trading up, and then added a intriguing franchise quarterback. It was a special day, according to John Schneider. I'm going to be breaking it all down here on our post-day 2 edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Going live here from the VMAC, an exciting day for John Schneider and the Seattle Seahawks. They came in with 4 picks. They only made 3 selections, but 3 potential impact players, at least 2 of them right now, and 1 who has a chance to maybe have the highest ceiling of every player they've selected to this point, an intriguing third round gamble or flyer, whatever word you want to use. I'm going to be diving into each and every one of those developments coming out of day 2 here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. So without further ado, let's get to it. The Seahawks coming into day 2, they had drafted Gray Zabel out of North Dakota State, the physical athletic guard, 18th overall. They had 4 selections coming into day 2 of the draft, 2 second rounders, 2 third rounders, 2 of those picks they acquired in the trades of DK Metcalf and Geno Smith with the Steelers and Raiders, respectively. They come into this draft with more ammunition on day 2 than anyone, and John Schneider doesn't take very much time to lower that number by 1 by being aggressive and moving up to pick number 35 to draft South Carolina safety Nick Emmanwori. And those that have been listening to our podcast throughout the pre-draft process, Emmanwori is a player that I have been fired up about really since I first laid eyes on him on film. I got to see this kid play at South Carolina during the season, but then going back and watching the tape, 5 full games for my exposures against SEC competition, it's just tantalizing how good that this guy could be in Mike Macdonald's defense. And you look at the numbers the last 3 seasons, twice eclipsed 80 tackles for the South Carolina Gamecocks. He was a day 1 starter as a true freshman, and South Carolina is not a blue blood program by any means, but they have kicked out a lot of really good defensive players, particularly on defense, that have gone on to the NFL. There's a number of them. TJ Sanders, their defensive tackle, went in the second round today as well. They kick out a lot of really good defensive players. For him to come in on day 1 and be tabbed as a starting safety for the Gamecocks, he was a freshman All-American, 80-plus tackles that year, didn't have any interceptions. You didn't see the ball skills or the coverage skills at that point, but he took off in his sophomore season, had 2 interceptions. Again, another really good year, making tackles, not quite as many as he had the freshman year, but got his hands on 6 pass breakups as well. Comes into this year as a junior, and he's a consensus All-American by the end of it. 88 tackles, 4 interceptions. He returned 2 of them for touchdowns. So we're talking a guy at 6'3", 220 pounds at the safety position that was not just picking off passes, but he was outrunning everybody and going to the end zone for 6 points. He's a super exciting prospect when you consider the athletic traits that he brings to the table. It is not an exaggeration to make the argument that he might have had a top 3 combine at any position. Given his size at 6'3", 220 pounds, ran a 4.32 second 40-yard dash. That's just absolutely flying at that size. 43-inch vertical jump. He was a perfect 10.0 athlete by the relative athletic scale. They said he was the best safety, best strong safety in that metric since they had their data starting in 1987. That's the kind of athlete that we are talking about here. And he's not just a workout warrior. Sometimes you see guys with these kind of athletic stats, you have to go back and watch the film and realize, well, he's really athletic, but I don't see the football player. That is not the case at all with Nick Emmanwori. This is a player who goes out on the field and puts up big numbers. He has all-around skills, both in the run game and as a cover safety. And honestly, a lot of people are going to conjure up imitations or comparisons to Cam Chancellor. Ironically, he was coached by the same defensive backs coach at South Carolina as what Cam Chancellor was all those years ago at Virginia Tech. So you've got that correlation. And Kyle Hamilton with the Ravens, who Mike Macdonald coached as the defensive coordinator there. So you have those comparisons with his size. There's not many safeties that come around with that size, but he's a different player with unique strengths and weaknesses compared to those two. Cam Chancellor never had anywhere near the explosiveness that Nick Emmanwori has with the 4.3 speed, 43-inch vertical. Cam Chancellor didn't test anywhere close to that, neither did Kyle Hamilton, quite frankly. This is a different type of athlete, and even though he's capable of playing in the box, they did it a lot for South Carolina, I would argue that that is the weakest point of his game at this point. This is a player who at times takes rough angles to the football. He can get a little bit over aggressive and overrun plays. And as athletic as he is, sometimes it's understandable, but he's got to hone that in, his angles and being able to get to the ball carrier. When he does, he has really improved as a tackler when you look at least statistically. Each of the past two seasons, under 7.2% missed tackle rate. He was above 10% his true freshman season, which is understandable, being a true freshman playing in the best conference in college football in the SEC. But he made marked improvements there. Still, the instincts and consistency with his pursuit angles, not always the cleanest looking tackler. Those are areas that can be coached up. He can get better in those areas, especially with the athleticism that he has. Where he is most natural, though, and you can tell he was a cornerback. He made sure to tell us this after the pick was made and he called in for his conference call. He started his high school career as a cornerback, and then he had a growth spurt, and we see now how big he is. He ended up having to move to safety for that reason, but you can see that cornerback experience, particularly the ball skills. Again, 4 picks last year, 2 of them that he returned, 4 interceptions, a bunch of pass breakups the year before. He's just very instinctive in that aspect. You can play him as a single high safety. You can play him too deep. You can play him in the box. And with his athleticism, this is such a unique player that you can play as a big nickel because he can line up against quick, speedy receivers. He can handle that. Maybe he doesn't have the change of direction skills that some players do, but he's so athletic and his recovery speed so good. You can put him against receivers. He can obviously match up size-wise and athletically against tight ends. That creates quite a weapon for Mike Macdonald with that cornerback background to be able to put him there. He's had success as a blitzer, just wasn't used a lot in that capacity. I would expect that Mike Macdonald is going to dig a little deeper into his toolbox to find ways to maximize him in that way. But even with Julian Love and Kobe Bryant, maybe he's not a starter on day one, but you're going to get a lot of snaps. Mike Macdonald loves to play 3 safety looks, and this guy is so versatile that you can use him in a number of different sub packages. I'm anticipating that they're going to find ways real early to be able to get him on the field a lot, and he's going to play an extensive workload. And with Bryant being a free agent after this year, this is also a hedge, a very expensive hedge at that, but it gives you a guy that you, at worst, you're going to be going into 2026 with Emmanwori and Julian Love as your 2 starters, and maybe Kobe Bryant ends up playing elsewhere. Who knows what's going to happen on that front? If all 3 of them are on the roster, Emmanwori has a higher ceiling than both of the starters here with his athletic ability and just how good of a football player that he already is, even with the deficiencies that he has. And so I think that this is a home run pick. Again, I had him as my 11th rated player on my big board. I thought he was going to be long gone, and maybe even before the Seahawks were up at 18. And he ended up falling to the beginning of the second round. He's a guy that they have been enamored with throughout the pre-draft process. It's understandable when you turn on the film. They had a great visit with him. All the reports out there about character concerns. Clearly, the Seahawks don't have those concerns with them even thinking about trading back into the first round to go get him last night, according to both Schneider and Macdonald. So I love this selection. I think he is a perfect fit for this defense. There's plenty of areas he's going to have to improve upon. And with the safeties he's already got, he's going to have to earn his reps. But I'm expecting with him not going in the first round, he made it very clear he is ready to kind of send a message to those 32 teams that skipped over him in Seattle, a place that he was really hoping to land playing in Mike Macdonald's defense. When I come back, I'm going to switch gears to Seattle's next selection. We're going to be talking about Elijah Arroyo, the tight end from Miami, and the big surprise at pick 92, going with a quarterback. Going to be diving into both those selections. That'll be coming up next here on our Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. As a small business owner, your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates all in one place. LinkedIn's new feature can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip. Add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture and double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. This episode's also brought your way by FanDuel. The NBA playoffs are underway, a ton of first-round action, and FanDuel is giving new customers an incredible way to get in the action. Right now, when you join FanDuel and place your first $5 bet, you'll get $250 in bonus bets if your bet wins. I love how FanDuel makes betting so easy, whether it's picking my favorite team or diving into player props. From three-pointers to steals to assists, FanDuel has so many ways to bet your favorite player props. Plus, after the game tips off, you can even combine live prop bets into a same-game parlay for a chance to win big. Don't miss out. Head to FanDuel.com and claim your $250 in bonus bets today. Welcome back to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in, reporting here live from the VMAC. An exciting day 2 for the Seattle Seahawks. They enter with 4 picks. They only selected 3 players. So some fans might look at that perspective and say, man, I wish we would have taken 4 players. But as I just mentioned, Seattle trades up to pick 35. They viewed Nick Emmanwori as a first-round player. They had the same grade range for him as Gray Zabel, who they picked at 18, able to go up and get him at pick 35, trading with the Titans. Dealt away pick 52 and 82, so only 1 third rounder with that move, which explains why they only had 3 selections today. Let's get to the pick at number 50 first. And this was the one that maybe I was the most surprised by. And some might say, well, there's a quarterback at the 3rd round pick. That's got to be the most surprising. Honestly, that was not one. We were talking in the draft room about this, the media draft room, before the pick came in of Jalen Milroe, and I'll get to more on him here in a few minutes. But we were talking about that potentially being an avenue Seattle could go down at pick 92 at that stage of the draft. Elijah Arroyo, the tight end from Miami, that was not somebody that I necessarily had on the radar there. Harold Fannin from Bowling Green was still available at that point. There were a couple other tight ends on the board that had been talked up as potential options for the Seahawks ahead of Arroyo. And the biggest reasons why I didn't have him in the mix, at least at that stage, I had a 3rd round grade on him. There's tantalizing film, but you're talking about a player who in 2022 and 2023 had a bunch of injuries. He missed a bunch of games. He only played in 6 games in 2022, 5 in 2023, shoulder and knee issues. Because of a sore knee this pre-draft season, he didn't do any of the athletic testing, both in the combine and Miami's pro day. But you take out the durability factor. He was healthy this year, catching passes from Cam Ward. And when you turn on the film, you see a very fluid athlete at 6'5", almost 6'5 and a half, 254 pounds. And John Schneider was talking about this today. If you take the injuries out of the equation, they believe that's why they were able to get him at 50. He actually said he could have been a top 15 talent in his mind if there had not been injuries. When they got to see him healthy this year, they were incredibly impressed. Even if he didn't get to 40 receptions, he was not the number 1 or even number 2 target in Miami's offense, but he was incredibly reliable. He had 1 drop his entire college career, under a 1% drop rate. So he's got reliable, soft hands. He runs like a receiver, so much to the point that John Schneider said tonight that there are members of the Seahawks coaching staff who are hoping to see Arroyo potentially play some snaps as an X. They see him as an X potentially at his size. Again, a little over 6'5", 254 pounds, playing the X position. That's the kind of athlete we're talking about here. Again, you didn't get testing to back that up, but watching on film, this guy doesn't look like he's 6'5", 254 pounds. He looks more like 6'2", 225 pounds. He looks like a big-bodied receiver, which makes that X comparison make sense. He has the ability to create after the catch. Miami this past season, and Arroyo talked about this with us today in his conference call, they had him doing a lot of short routes in this offense this past season. He was doing a lot of slip routes off of wham blocking action on split zone concepts. So he was getting a lot of dump offs, but he was turning those into big yardage. He averaged more than 16 yards per reception this past season for the Hurricanes. And he had almost 9 yards per catch after the catch. So he was really good at manufacturing yardage, and he didn't do it by breaking a lot of tackles. Pro Football Focus had him down for just 3 missed tackles for us this year. He's just so athletic that when he gets the football, he can turn up and pick chunks of yardage up in a hurry, and he's got some ability to make guys miss a little bit in space. Not going to break a lot of tackles. That's not his game. But he has the ability to win downfield. Miami didn't utilize that very much. I feel like in Clint Kubiak's offense in Seattle, that's going to be a bigger part of his fit in this passing game. They're going to find ways to try to stretch the field some with him, with his athleticism, his size mismatches that he creates against linebackers, safeties, and if he ends up on corners on the outside, he is bigger than all of them, and he's got great athleticism. The durability is the biggest factor, and as far as positional versatility goes, he's played some inline. Last year, he had 320 snaps as an inline blocker, easily the most in his career, in part due to the injuries earlier. But even at his size, you'd think he would be more of a wide tight end at that bill. That's not something that he has been able to really do up to this point at a high level. Now, he is a good move blocker. If you have him in an H-back position, he's a nub tight end, you have him in the slot. When he's on the move, he can block. He had a 71.7 zone blocking grade from PFF. And you watch the tape, you can see the athleticism. That allows him to win position battles, and he can be more physical there than he would be as an inline tight end. That's just not his game. So you see some carryover with what Noah Fant was supposed to bring. You see the future for the Seahawks at tight end being Arroyo and Barner, and maybe Noah Fant has something to say about that going into the last year of his contract. But the Seahawks now have 3 tight ends that they can be very confident about in different ways, can be involved in the passing game, and they can play multiple alignments. So that pick, there's a lot of people that were railing it. Again, I had a 3rd-round pick on him. However, when you listen to what John Schneider's talking about in this offense that Clint Kubiak runs, it really accentuates tight ends' talents. So I think that Arroyo is a player who absolutely can live up to that 50th overall pick if he can stay healthy. That is really the key here. He's a younger player still. If he can stay healthy like he did last season, there's a lot of room for growth if you could utilize him as a downfield target and then mix in those after the catch capabilities as a move blocker as well. I think he can make an impact in the run game that way. There's a lot to like about this pick. The health is the biggest question mark here, but I like the scheme fit for him. Now let's get to that final pick, the one that really stunned most people in the Pacific Northwest. And that selection is Jalen Milroe, the quarterback out of Alabama. And listen, if you've watched our show consistently, Rob Rang, my co-host in crime, and we were both in the draft room today. This has been a discussion point for us as recently as a couple of days ago. We were talking about the quarterback position, and nobody thought Shedeur Sanders was still going to be available going into day 3, but that's where we're at. At pick 92, there were discussions going on in the media room. A few people wondering, hey, might they go Shedeur Sanders here? But at that stage of the draft, you're wanting to go for potential. You're wanting to go for upside. And at the end of the day, Shedeur Sanders just does not have the traits. He does not have the tools that Jalen Milroe has. We're talking 4.39 speed, blazing speed. He's got Mike Vick coming out of Virginia Tech type wheels. He's built more like Mike Vick than, say, Lamar Jackson, who's a leaner frame. He runs that 4.39, though, and he is built. This is a thick quarterback, powerful quarterback that had 20 rushing touchdowns this year for Alabama. He also has a howitzer. I think he has the strongest arm in this entire draft class. He can throw the ball over the moon, and he's a very effective downfield passer. He's got good touch on deep balls. He averaged 10 yards per attempt 2 years ago in his first year at Alabama as a starter. So there's a lot to like in terms of the physical traits. And there are times where you see a guy that looks like he could be a really good NFL quarterback. The inconsistencies, and this is why I had a 4th-round grade on him, this is about as early as I would have gone. So I think from that perspective, it made sense for Seattle to take this shot. If they were sold on him, which clearly they were, they had a great visit with him, an official 30 visit in Seattle here at the VMAC. And they really liked the maturity, the smarts this guy brings to the table, the passion for football, and obviously the athletic traits. There was too much to pass up there. But as a passer beyond the arm strength and the ability to throw downfield, way too inconsistent on the short to intermediate throws. You can see it in clips of the Senior Bowl where he would throw balls 60 yards downfield and on a dime, and then the next couple throws that are 10-yarders, he would be erratic. The short to intermediate game is the biggest area that he has got to improve from an accuracy standpoint. His footwork can get in the way in that regard. He's got to figure out how to iron that out. That is coachable. He's definitely shown in the deep ball that he can get it done. Can you get those short to intermediate passes more accurate and more consistent? And then the pocket presence is the other thing that really jumps out. Typically, these really mobile quarterbacks are guys that they have eyes in the back of their head and they are able to sense that pressure and then use their legs. There are times he does that, but there's also a lot of film where he's kind of oblivious to what's going on around him. The Michigan Bowl game really stood out to me, where you could see just how long he has to go to really get better in that area. He is raw in that regard. And he's a smart kid. I think he can figure it out. Geno Smith was not good with pocket presence coming in the league, and I think that was maybe his biggest strength the last 3 years as a starter with that bad offensive line, his ability to maneuver the pocket. So that's something that can be coached up, but he is not where he needs to be to start in the NFL. The good news is the Seahawks are not going to be expecting him to do that right away. They are going to be able to, and Mike Macdonald does not like the word patient. We figured that out in the press conference tonight, but they're going to be able to take their time with this kid and allow him to develop and see if he can turn into a starting caliber quarterback and develop those areas of his game that created problems this past year, where his interception rate almost doubled and he didn't throw as many touchdowns, just far more inconsistent after being a Heisman finalist the year before. He didn't see the consistency in his game. But the Seahawks have time now because Sam Darnold, they just signed him. He's got a 3-year deal. You just brought Drew Lock back. Sam Howell, I don't know how much longer he's going to be on the roster. I find it hard to believe it's going to be much longer. But with the addition of Milroe, it feels like there's not room for him. We'll see. John Schneider, Mike Macdonald tried to sell the idea they could have 5 quarterbacks in the roster, but I'm expecting there's going to be some movement on that front. Nonetheless, you've got 2 seasoned veterans in Darnold and Lock that have started a lot of games in the NFL. You have a youngster in Jalen Milroe who has flashed a ton of talent in Alabama. He's just been inconsistent. You now have that opportunity to really develop him. So this, to me, was the hot spot in that late third, early fourth, where you could take a chance on this kid and it would be well worth it because he does have the tools. If you hit, Jalen Milroe could be a top 5 caliber quarterback if you can clean up the areas that he struggles, because he's got traits you can't teach, and he's a really smart kid. He is a grounded kid. He's been a captain. There's a lot to like about him. There are just some nuances to playing quarterback that he is not where he needs to be. This was one of the few teams at this stage. If they would have picked him in the second round, I would have thought it's a little rich potentially. But here, you don't have to force the issue. If it doesn't end up panning out, you use a 3rd-round pick on it. If it turns into a really good starter, then you've got yourself a steal in that regard. So I think that there's a lot to like here with this 92nd selection, taking this chance. This is where you can do it. You can argue they could have picked some skill guys here and not picked a quarterback, but John Schneider has not had the board fall to him the right way most of the years he's been general manager. That changed this year, and he was able to have the board fall his way in a QB they really like. They could get him at 92, and that's what made part of this really a special evening for them. And the good news is they've still got 5 picks left to work with on day 3. When I come back, I'm going to be taking a look at what positions the Seahawks might be targeting going into day 3 and a few names to keep an eye on going into the 4th round and beyond. You're listening to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Welcome back to the Blue Friday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. A special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in on this late Friday night. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Looking at the first 2 days of the draft so far, at pick 18, the Seahawks get Gray Zabel, the guard out of North Dakota State. So they address the interior offensive line right out of the gate. The highest drafted guard sent Steve Hutchinson, and Steve Hutchinson was a big reason why this pick was made, now being an offensive line consultant for the Seahawks. So you've got a little bit of full circle going on there. And then today on day 2, Nick Emmanwori at pick 35, the Seahawks trade up for the incredibly athletic, versatile safety, move up with 2 of their day 2 picks at 35 of the Titans. They draft him, pick 50, Elijah Arroyo, the tight end out of Miami, athletic pass catcher that it feels like has just scratched the surface of his potential. That's why they were willing to take him in the second round. John Schneider went as far as saying if he was healthy, he would have been a top 15 prospect in this draft potentially. So they think they got a potential steal. He's just got to stay healthy. And then the big surprise, at least for some people, Jalen Milroe at pick number 92. The Seahawks added a quarterback in the draft for just the third time in 16 years. So keeping that in mind, Seattle's drafted a guard. They have drafted a tight end, they've drafted a safety, and they've drafted a quarterback. Going into day 3, from a positional standpoint, we've talked about this throughout the pre-draft process. I think that the two positions that are still loaded going into day 3 at this juncture from a depth perspective, there's still a lot of really good receivers that are available on the board. There's also a lot of really good defensive tackles. There was a run on those guys, and yet there's still some really good DTs that are available. And one that comes to mind for me, the defensive tackle position, and it'd be interesting because I mocked him to Seattle, and I had more trades in my final mock. So who knows if he's going to be there at 137. John Schneider made it sound like they'd be willing to move around. If there's a guy they really like, they might try to move up and get a player in the early to mid 4th round. But Indiana's CJ West is still available. And what I love about this kid, he's short and stout. He's 6'1", 315 pounds. So he doesn't sound like a nose tackle, but because he's got that short, powerful build, he could take on double teams. He's very technically sound. He's got the athleticism to penetrate. That is a player that I would keep a very close eye on. That would make a lot of sense for the Seattle Seahawks. And those of you listening, I haven't had a chance to look at all the draft picks from the 3rd round because it was an absolute blur. If I do read off a player that's been drafted, I apologize. I'm typically as informed as anyone, but from my understanding, Ty Robinson is still available from Nebraska. That would be another player. He had a visit with the Seahawks. He's not a nose tackle, but he can play that base 5 tech position. He can play the 3 tech position, and he's got the positional versatility. He is somebody that can really get after the quarterback. He had 7 sacks this year for the Cornhuskers. There's a lot to like about him in Mike Macdonald's scheme with that positional versatility, the motor, the relentless motor he plays with, and just loves the game of football, a physical, aggressive player. Those two players, West and Robinson, would be defensive linemen that I think could make a lot of sense for the Seahawks early on day 3. And then when you look at the wide receiver position, to me, the biggest surprise as far as guys are still on the board, Jalen Royals from Utah State. This guy was an absolute dynamite maestro after the catch during his time with the Aggies. And I know he's had some injuries. He missed some time this year, but he hasn't had any serious injuries, nothing where he's had to have surgeries. This would be a player with his size. He's 6 foot, over 200 pounds, tackle breaking ability, kind of like a running back. Had a bunch of big plays of 50-plus yards. 2 years ago, he had 7 of them. I think this guy would be a dynamite weapon to add to the receivers that they have currently, and they need speed. This guy's a 4-4 player. Get another player that's got some speed to burn. He would be one that would make sense. And then Nick Nash from San Jose State. I was hoping Pat Bryant from Illinois was going to be on the board, but the Denver Broncos took him in the 3rd round, so he is off the board. Nick Nash is a player, formerly a quarterback, that has the after-the-catch capability. 16 touchdowns this year for the Spartans. Those are 2 receivers early on day 3 that I could see making a lot of sense for the Seahawks. And moving away from those positions, if you look in the secondary, there was a major run on corners. Siobhan Ravel is gone. Darian Porter is gone. A lot of really good corners that are off the board, but Seattle has not taken a corner. They took a safety. I expect that corner is going to be a position with Josh Jobe and Rick Woolen being free agents coming up this upcoming March. I would anticipate that Seattle is going to be looking at the cornerback position, and it might not be a boundary corner. They might look at somebody like Jabbar Muhammad from Oregon that is a ball hawk at the slot position, so they can have Devin Witherspoon play more on the outside. There's plenty of lengthy corners that they can look at that are still on the board as well. At this stage, there's going to be some warts. They're developmental players, or guys that have clear flaws, but there are plenty of corners that should be available here on day 3 that can help the Seahawks. I am fascinated to see whether the slot position is one that they take a close look at. As for the edge rusher group, that would be one other spot I would look at. They haven't done anything at that position to this stage. There's plenty of talent that's still on the board at edge rusher. Kamon Rucker from North Carolina is a name that I'd keep an eye on with those 5th round picks that could make some sense for Seattle. That's got a little bit of positional flexibility. He's played in a 4-3 and a 3-4, and he's been a team captain. that may be a player that's worth looking at. David Walker from Central Arkansas, also a player that starred in the Senior Bowl. Seattle loves those Senior Bowl guys. Walker is another hyper active player that uses his hands well. Hasn't played that top competition, but he did really well at the Senior Bowl like Gray Zabel did, and Seattle's been more willing now to take those FCS prospects. So he is somebody that I would keep an eye on there on the edge position. And offensive line. I don't know that Seattle's done an offensive line. There's several names that jump out to me. Addison West still on the board from Western Michigan, a guy that has played guard, but he's also got a little experience at center. Might be worth a flyer to bring him in to compete at either one of those positions. Same can be said for Clay Webb from Jacksonville State, another really athletic former 5-star recruit at Georgia, has played a lot of football. He has played guard. He was a center coming out of high school. He can play center in a pinch. He did some at the Senior Bowl. Another player that really has bolstered his stock. But there's some athletic centers. Jake Majors from Texas could be an option at that position as well. And they might even look at some of the tackles. Charles Grant still out there from William & Mary, really athletic tackle. There are some tackles that could be worth a flyer as swing players to bring in to compete with Mike Jarrell and Josh Jones, who was added in free agency. So there's a lot of different directions the Seahawks could go. And of course, I got to finish last with the running back position. This is a loaded running back draft class, and a bunch of them went off the board on day 2, but there's still plenty of talent out there going into day 3. If the Seahawks late want to take a flyer on one of the backs near the back end of the draft, that could be a position that makes some sense. Although at this point, I'm wondering if they're going to go that route with the way they've handled things so far. It still feels like those other positions of value, especially after taking a quarterback, which may be viewed as a luxury pick at this point with who they've signed. Running backs probably on the back burner, but there's so much depth in this class, and there's some potential guys that could be workhorses that are still available that the Seahawks could look at, including Devin Neal from Kansas and a number of others. So running back is a sleeper position to watch on day 3 if they want to add more depth at that position. As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, we will have a bonus Saturday episode recapping all of the events coming out of day 3. Make sure that you are listening in as we dive in to all the selections, and enjoy the rest of your Friday night. Go Hawks.